Welcome everyone. We are going to do Module 4 Homework 2. Module 4 Homework 2 is about what are called complex numbers. I'm going to oversimplify things a little bit, but complex numbers are numbers that have an I in them. As far as we're concerned, that's what they are. So this I is equal to the square root of -1. Suppose you now take the fact that I equals the square root of -1, and for whatever reason you choose to square both sides. If you square both sides, the left side, of course, is I squared. The right side, remember, a square cancels a square root, and you get -1. So that gives us the fact that I squared is -1. So two important facts you need to know. I is the square root of -1, and I squared is -1 itself. Now be careful. I think every single semester, somebody at some point tells me that I is equal to -1. I is not -1. It's the square root of -1. It's squared that is equal to -1. Okay. So let's take a look at simplifying the square root of -7. The square root of -7, I could rewrite that if I want to, and you'll see why I'm doing it in a moment, I think, by replacing the square root of the -7 with -1 times 7. Now that I have that, we can use a rule that we've used that says you can split a square root up into two parts as long as there's multiplication inside of it. And then this, we just said, is equal to I. So this is I times the square root of 7. So what do we conclude in this problem? We conclude that the square root of -7 turns out to be I squared of 7. That kind of thing will always work. In other words, if you have a negative inside of a square root, you can always take the negative outside of the square root and replace it with an I. That will always work. You can take the negative from inside of a square root and replace it with an I on the outside. So for example, if I was to ask, what is the square root of -25 equal to? Well, we would use the rule I just gave you to take the negative out and make it an I, which means this is really I times the square root of 25, which is I times 5, because the square root of 25 is 5, and that we more normally write as 5I. Again, the key point is, if you have a negative inside of a square root, it can come out in front as just a regular I. So anytime the answer to a problem has an I in it, it turns out there's always a way to write it in the form A plus BI. And as it says over here, you can also use a minus if you want, if a minus is appropriate. This A plus BI or A minus BI form is called the standard form for a complex number. The standard form for a complex number. For instance, all of these are in standard form. They're a number plus a number times I. A number minus, remember minus is okay, a number times I. A number plus a number times I. Those are standard form. These are not standard form. For example, this one here, if I rewrite it as 9 plus 2I, now it's in standard form. Standard form requires the first one to just be a number and the second one to be a number with an I next to it. This is not in standard form because standard form does not allow a square on the I. And this one is not in standard form, and we'll go into why that is later, but that's also not in standard form. Okay, some exercises. I think, or I'm 99% sure for all the exercises below, these are all things that you should be able to have at least a good guess as to how to do it before I show you. So for all of them, you should really pause the video, try it, and then watch what I do. And if it's something, if I get a different answer than you, you really need to try to understand why your answer is not correct and mine is. So to add these together, you're simply going to add like terms. 3 plus 6 is 9. And 8i plus 7i, that is 15i. That's it. That's the answer. Okay, for this one, as with all of them, you should pause, try it, and then unpause and see what you get. Okay, we're trying to figure out what x minus y is. Well, you can always replace something with something it's equal to. So you can replace the x with negative 7 plus 5i. Then, let me make that red. There's a red minus between them. So then we have the minus. And then we need to replace the y with the thing that y is equal to, so we get 10 minus 4i. Now the problem is I skipped a step that I'm not allowed to skip. It turns out that anytime you replace something that follows a minus sign, you always have to put parentheses around it. So the y we replace with this, it needs parentheses. So now that gives us negative 7 plus 5i. The minus distributes, and we get minus 10 plus 4i. And then we simplify like before. Add these like terms, and we get negative 17. Add these two pieces, and we get 9i. And that is the answer. Okay, here you would just distribute. So we'll start by distributing. It's going to give me negative 16i squared plus 56i. Now, pause the video and see if you know why we're not done. Well, here's why we're not done. This is negative 16. Remember, I squared is negative 1. So that's negative 1 plus, oh, sorry, mistake here. This is 56i, not 56i squared, 56i. So plus 56i. This product is positive 16. And now we're done. Why weren't we done before? Because the answer has to be in standard form, and standard form is a number plus a number times I. No I squareds, just I. So that's our final answer. Okay, this one here, I'll give you a hint. There's a 4-letter word that tells you what to start with. Pause the video, see if you can do it. So this is foiling here. It's not the only way, but it's the most common way. The outsides would give you 12. The inside would give you negative 24i. The last ones, this times that, would give you negative 4i. And the last one here with the last one here will give you minus 8i squared. Before I do the other ones, let's take a look at this. This is minus 8 times I squared. You may remember that I squared is negative 1, so it's minus 8 times negative 1, which is positive 8. So this part becomes positive 8. This is negative 12. These are like terms, which gives me negative 28i. And these I can combine to get negative 4, and so we end up with negative 4 minus 28i as our final answer. Okay, again, pause the video. Okay, it's not uncommon for students to get this wrong before they're shown how to do it. Before I show you, I just want to remind you of something. So forget this for a moment. We'll come back to it. Suppose I asked you, what is 6 squared? Well, 6 squared, I think you all know, is 36. And why? Because 6 squared is 6 times 6. Here's my point. What does it mean to square something? It means to take that thing and multiply it by itself. That's what it always means. So how do we square this? Well, we take the thing we're squaring and we multiply it by itself. Now what do? We can FOIL like last time. First times first is 25. Outside times outside is negative 10i. Inside times inside is negative 10i. And last times last we'll have a negative times a negative, so that's positive. And we will have a 2 times a 2, that's 4. And we'll have an I times an I, that's I squared. Now, just like last time, I'm going to deal with that term first. So this is equal to 4 times I squared, but I squared is -1, so we'll end up with -4. The middle term, we get -20i. And the first term, of course, is 25. And then 25 minus 4 is 21. So we will have 21 minus 20i. It's a little hard to read. 21 minus 20i. Okay, this one is a lot of work. First of all, there's a rule that I haven't mentioned yet. Anytime you have a problem that has a negative inside of a square root, the very first thing you must do is the rule that I told you about negative with the square root. So, what did I tell you about negative with the square root? I said you can take the negative out of the square root and put it in front as an I. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the square root as it is. I'm going to leave the 28 in there as it is, and the negative will come out in front as an I. Now, I need to simplify the square root of 28. That's a factor tree. You can do it another way, but the most common way students look at it is a factor tree. 28, that is 2 times 14. 14, that is 7 times 2. So the factor tree method tells me I'm going to take the common 2 and put that in front. I'll take the remaining 7 and put that on the inside. And so that is -12 plus I times 2 square root of 7. This goes there in place of that. The whole thing was divided by 32, so don't forget that. We can now split this fraction up. Whenever you have a plus or a minus in the numerator, you can split a fraction up. It's got to be in the numerator, though. So this is equal to -12 over 32 plus I times 2 times square root of 7 over 32. This is equal to -12 over 32 plus, I can reduce this by dividing 2 into 2 and 32, getting 16. So that second part becomes I square root of 7 over 16. I can also reduce this one by dividing by 2, giving me -6 over 16. So this is, I can divide that by 4. I can divide even more, so let's do it by 4. So that's what we had. Let's divide the top and bottom by 4, getting -3 over 8. So we get -3/8 plus I square root of 7 over 16. But that's not done. We still need to go further. The reason we need to go further is we need to be in standard form, a plus bi. A plus bi means you need to have a number, a plus sign, a number, and next to that number an I. So we need to take the I in the second part and put it next to it. So the answer is -3/8 plus the square root of 7/16 times I. That is the only acceptable answer as being 100% correct. Okay, please pause the video and try this one. If you're like a lot of students, you're going to tell me the answer is 4. And 4 is not the answer, and that's okay. But the reason for this example is to point something out. Remember what I said earlier, if you have negatives inside of a square root in a problem, the first thing you have to do is turn it into I. And using the rule that we had near the very beginning today, you pull the negative out and you make it an I. You pull the negative out and make it an I. So this becomes I times the square root of positive 2 times I times the square root of positive 18. The I times the I will be I squared. And the square root of 2 times the square root of 18 will be square root of 36. So I squared is -1. The square root of 36 is 6. And that will give me -6 for my final correct answer. I made a minor little mistake earlier. Let me just go up and show you. I didn't mean to say many students will say 4. I meant to say many students will say +6, which is wrong. The answer is -6, not +6. Okay, this one here. We can use a rule that we've seen earlier, which says if you have a square root on top of a square root, you can turn that into a single square root. That then becomes the square root of -5 because this reduces to 5. And you can pull the negative out and make it an I. So the final answer is I square root of 5. Now, I actually did something wrong here, but it's okay. It worked out, but it's something I shouldn't have done. And to be honest with you, I just wasn't thinking. I like to say I did it to make a point, but I really didn't. When you are doing a problem that has a square root of a negative in it, the very first thing you need to do is pull out the I. Why? Because sometimes if you don't, you'll end up with the wrong answer. So you pull out the I first. That gives me I square root of 15 over square root of 3. Then we can do what we did before. We can combine the square roots, and that gives me I of the square root of 15 over 3. And that gives me I times 5 because that reduces to 5. And that's it. I times the square root of 5. Same answer as before. Okay, this is an important one for you to try. So please, please, please pause the video, try this. Okay. The common mistake that students make with this is they FOIL. This is not a foiling problem because you're adding these things. If you were multiplying those, it would be a foiling problem. So since you're adding, it's just like terms. 3 plus 5 is 8. And -4 plus I plus 2i is -2i. Done. Nothing more to do. Foiling would be wrong. Okay, this last one is just to make a point. The square root of -12. Step 1, remember, pull the negative out as an I, so that's I times the square root of 12. Then we'll do a factor tree with the square root of 12. 12 breaks up into 4 times 3. 4 breaks up into 2 times 2. So the factor tree will have a 2 on the outside and a 3 on the inside. But remember, there was an I there in front also. So it's going to be I times 2 times square root of 3. And this is the point of this example. When you have an answer that looks like this, we generally put the number in front, then the I, and then the radical. So the standard way to write this would be 2 times I times the square root of 3. And that is our last example. Yes. And so we are done with this recording.